Welcome. This is Miss Pope. I'm going to review Rhetoric and Medea by Euripides. To start with, let's think back to last semester when we started talking about rhetoric. All right, there's several components, so we're going to review. What is said? So this is the message. What are they trying to convey? What's the speaker or the writer telling us? Who is saying it? Okay, this is where you can establish your credibility or how you know not to believe someone. Who is listening? Okay, there's a bigger difference in speaking to your parents than speaking to your friends. You speak differently depending on who is listening to you, right? You also have where and when it's being said. So is it before you get caught or after you get caught? That's super important. Why it is being said is also very important, okay? What's the overall purpose, right? And then how it's being said, especially, if you're thinking about talking argumentatively, is it logic driven? Is it not? What is the tone? And how does that all work together to create the rhetorical triangle? All right, so the rhetorical triangle shows the relationship between all of these factors. It's understanding these rhetorical elements that makes writing and analysis much, much clearer. This is going to be a huge advantage understanding this when you read Medea, okay? So just a quick review of what it looks like. We have our speaker in one corner, audience, the message, all right? That's always like at the top, okay? We have tone, style, and purpose, and then we have our ethos, pathos, logos. Cool. You guys remember those? Awesome. So let's get into looking at how do we consider the author and the speaker, okay? So when we're reading Medea, what's super interesting is that the writer, the playwright, is a man, okay? So gender influences this. Your race, geographical situation, socioeconomic status, and even the political orientation of an author can all influence the way they write something, okay? Sometimes there's hidden agendas. Sometimes they include important biographical information in their own writing that maybe even at the time they're not aware they're doing, okay? Then with the audience, it's super important to consider, are they friend or foe, okay? How will they receive the message? Are they going to misinterpret it if you speak, sarcastically, or do you have to be pretty straightforward? How will they affect tone and style, right? We speak differently to young children as to peers our own age, as to people that are older than us. Who's the intentional audience, and then who is the unintentional audience? Huge, huge factors here, okay? And over time, does the message or the effect of the message change as the audience changes over time? So I think this is important to consider because Medea is a play written by a man when the Greeks were celebrating and loving on all the plays. So what was his message and how is it still relevant or irrelevant today? So consider this when trying to identify the exact message. If there's anything I can tell you, this page, this portion is going to be the most important when you are reading and taking notes on the play, okay? So what is the topic in 1 or 2 words about which the piece is written, all right? What's the most important aspect or perspective about that topic that the author wants you to understand? What exactly does the author want the reader to think, do, feel, or say? And what is the no on the other side of the author's yes, okay, and vice versa. So there are a lot of monologues in this play, and they're very important because of the amount of rhetoric in it and the way that they influence the events that unfold in the play. So let's get to the background on the Greek theater. I highly suggest you guys, if you have a little bit of extra time and you're bored, watch these videos. They're super awesome. So the Greek theater was huge, right? They had this giant festival of Dionysus. They would close down things. It was like equivalent to the Olympics. It was an honor to be in the plays, and you were all required to go to them. It was a huge celebration, all right? So there were 3 main tragedians, such a hard word to say, and these guys would have competitions. So they would write plays, get together, have this big festival. There'd be esteemed judges, just like on American Idol, and they would rate and give a winner, okay? Also within these plays, the members wore masks, typically in honor of Dionysus, but also it helped convey the emotions that the person was feeling. It allowed them to be multiple characters. It also, from other research I've done, was able to help them project their voice, because you got to think these people didn't have microphones, right? There is a chorus in Greek plays, okay? The chorus is typically a couple of members, and then you have a choragus who is the leader of everything. Okay, so the chorus is in the play essentially to give advice and to comment on what is happening, right? So if you've ever seen Hercules, you have the muses, they kind of serve that purpose. If you've watched Lizzie McGuire back in the day, that's sort of the same thing, like someone's giving commentary on the choices that are being made, all right? And then the video will talk to you about some of the architecture. Then you also have Greek tragedy. It was its own genre, okay? It was huge, big deal. Some of the biggest things, Marcia, it deals with someone's tragic flaw, right? I think we've talked about this with the Odyssey. They always have death, which we are aware that tragedies do since we just read Romeo and Juliet. Then you also have catharsis, which is a purging of emotions. So I like to think about this. Any romantic comedy where a person has been broken up with and they think it's the worst thing that's ever happened to them, they'll like play a mixtape that person gave them on repeat and just cry and eat their ice cream, right? That's catharsis, a purging of their emotions, okay? So let's talk about our playwright, Euripides. Out of the three, he was not as popular as the other two, all right? So unlike Sophocles, he doesn't demonstrate the same reverence for the gods, which is interesting because this play, this festival, is put on specifically to honor a god, Dionysus, all right? Euripides does not depict the gods as reliable, consistent, or virtuous, which, as most of you know, they aren't. But that would have been out of the ordinary to include that in a play. Okay, so he gives them very human-like qualities, which I think is interesting because it does give the audience maybe a more connection to gods, right? So it's very important. Think about this. Euripides was criticized often for his abrupt endings, especially one like in Medea. Okay, you're about to read it. You're going to understand what we mean by Medea being let off the hook. Okay, it's a very short play. There's also a term for this, Medea getting left off the hook, and it's deus ex machina, term used to note whenever a play is suddenly and abruptly resolved, and Euripides is infamous for this, okay? So some scholars argue that Euripides was sympathetic to the plight of women. So that's why I mentioned earlier that it's interesting he is a man writing about a woman in a horrible situation. At this point, you have read Jason and the Golden Fleece, so you understand that some of the actions she has made were probably directly influenced by the gods and her obsession with Jason. So people like to argue that Euripides uses Medea's violence as the byproduct of her repression or oppression. Okay, so he lets her off the hook. She can't help it that she is this way because society has made her this way. All right, so we have our two, really, Medea is the main character, right? So we have our two big people, our big players. So Jason was the rightful king, goes and is successful getting the Golden Fleece, comes back, he's rejected because Medea's like, oh, I'm going to make sure my man gets to be the king. And then all of that stuff unfolds. He's rejected. So what does he do? He's like, sorry, I really want to be king. You need to leave. I need a new wife. So it's really interesting that anyone would expect Medea to not respond negatively to this, right? They're already married. They have kids at this point. Timeline's a little unclear, but it's important to note she's a big deal. She's a sorceress, all right? You guys remember Circe from the Odyssey? Same situation, all right? She is the granddaughter of the sun. That's cool. Her father's a big deal. She helps Jason get the golden fleece. So when she chooses to reject her family and leave, that's a big Greek no-no. She should have known it was never going to end well for her, okay? So her problem, her downfall, she trusts Jason completely, right? She falls for him. She is willing to turn on her father, her brother. She leaves her homeland, and she is a foreigner in a new land. She is an outsider, okay? This is a problem. So it's specifically a problem because Athenian men cannot marry foreign women, all right? And then they could only be concubines. And then once Medea is there, she can't get help after Jason leaves her. So she's alone. Let's talk about the chorus and the play for a few minutes. Some differences to note, all right? Typically, men are always the actors in Greek plays. Of course they are. That's the norm, right? So we expect that with Romeo and Juliet. It's the same. It started way before Shakespeare. They demonstrate some partiality to Medea. Okay, they will openly criticize her. They tell her she's making bad choices. They try to calm her down. It doesn't really work. So they still support her. They think that she has been wronged, but they do disagree with a lot of the things she chooses to do. Okay, so they engage in dialogue as a unit with the characters. They offer observations. They reflect on the themes, and they act as mediators. And then here's our troubling question. What do we make of Medea once we finish reading this? Is she a hero or is she a villain? Is what she has done valid, or is there another way? Okay. She is the paradigm of the wronged wife. She, at the end of the play, so this is interesting, she appears above the scheme in the place of the gods. So she would have been above the stage. But at the beginning of it, she is hidden behind this so that she's off stage, but we can hear her crying and how upset and grieving she is that Jason has left her. She is not trivial. It's interesting. Her name means clever, and then she represents the dualities of women's character. You'll see how she appeals to Jason in different ways, which type of rhetoric she uses, and which you find to be more effective. The end.